Okay, we are online again. So we're back with our new chapter talking about soil conservation and control of erosion. So just now there is a reason why I skipped the soil erosion control, but because this is one chapter dedicated to discuss about the techniques and the ways people can use to defer or to reduce the extent of erosion that happens on the landscape. So in this chapter, we're going to talk about many techniques that people use, including the chemical, physical, and maybe some structural changes that people could do. And of course, now, this is more about management of the soil. Without further ado, let's see. Soil conservation, what does that mean? That means you do whatever that you do in order to maintain its original function. So I think this definition does not carry so much of weightage. Now we go straight to the aim of conservation. Of course, why we want to conserve the soil? Because you want to maintain and sustain its original function. Now let's put it this way. Some soil, once it's degraded, may not be used and function as it used to be because due to the extensive loss of nutrient or due to loss of the structure, previously cannot be replaced. However, just want to remind you, if you want a soil that is badly damaged to return to its original state, naturally it is possible. However, for your information, if a soil is badly damaged and you want natural process to return to its original state, sometimes it may take years. I'm talking about at least 30 years. So that's why if you hear 30 years, how many years do you have in your lifetime? 30 years? Kan? So 30 years is extremely long time to wait, and there's a lot of things people can do within that 30 years. You can get married, you can have the children, and sometimes in that land, kan, after 30 years, you can make a lot of money by planting and producing a lot of crops from there, building houses. Kan? So these are the things like, yeah. The best solution to solve erosion is that don't let don't let the damage happen in the first place. That is the easiest way out. Yeah. However, in this case, we're going to talk about prevention and also countermeasures if an erosion is already happened. Yeah. Okay, so these are the strategies that we're going to talk about. It. Yeah. So the point that we're going to talk about here, the aim, okay, the approach that to have this soil conservation is to reduce the erosion where it is possible. Of course, when the erosion is reduced, that means natural process can cover itself and overcome the minor erosion that happens. Nature can do its job by itself. Yeah. Number two, to retain and to improve physical structure of the soil. So this one is much more important because without structure, without texture, you cannot stand on solid ground. Some places needs to be that. Apart from nutrient, is the physical structure. Then number three, to maintain the organic matter content in the soil. Why is so important? I don't think I need to explain. Organic matter, nutrient, structure, fertility, so many things. And then number four, to make the best use of the available water. Um, Now this one is more applicable in agriculture lah. Yeah, that's why. Because some soil, when it is already established, having a lot of organic matter, it actually have a certain capacity to retain water. But once the organic matter is being stripped due to erosion, it loses the available water. So organic matter is not just for nutrient, it's also to retain water as well. And then lastly, to maintain the fertility of soil by reducing nutrient loss and to replace those that are lost. These are the things. Now, if you look carefully at these 5 points, most of these aims are actually almost addressing the agricultural fertility. Because why? I think most of our food production happens to be on a soil surface. Nowadays, although I know there's a growing trend of having crops grown on aquaponics, for example. But that's not too extensive as far as I can say in Malaysia. Most of our food grows in Malaysia, or many major food producers in the world, they still grow on lands. So that's why soil conservation so important to ensure food security actually. No good soil, you have no food. That's why, yeah. Okay, main approach in soil conservation. Whatever the techniques that you do, these are the strategies. Yeah. So number one, conditioning the soil to make it more resistant to detachment. So of course, rain will come down no matter what you do. But as long as you can reduce the detachment, technically no soil will going to move if you don't detach it. So how do you do it? There's so many ways, kan? Either you stop the impact, or you cover the soil, or you add more glue. It's not glue, but actually it's organic matter. You add more organic matter that sticks the soil together so that they don't easily come off and move out. Remember the three steps? You disrupt the first one, then the rest will not going to be interrupted. Okay, number two, cover the soil to protect it from rainfall impact. That is also quite related to it. Slow down rain off. You stop the transportation. Sorry, you stop the transportation of the soil. So no matter what you do, soil is still there. So I mean, it's not so severe like the erosion. Okay. And last one, providing safe ways for the disposal of unavoidable surface runoff. Now, if you have an event of high rainfall, where does all the water goes? Number one, it can absorb by the soil. But you see, when you look at city area, how many times you can see city area can be effectively absorb all this moisture? Because I think you have heard this word so frequently, especially those days in KL. Banjir kilat. You also know what is that, kan? It happens so fast because why? Heavy rainfall, water have nowhere to go, and then they rise up lah. These are the classic problem for urbanized area like KL. I think KL now is a bit better lah, kan? Because they have smart tunnel. Okay, smart tunnel is one of the solution to address the flash flood. And also, smart tunnel is this, yeah, providing safe ways for the disposal of unavailable surface runoff. So, okay, I think I'm going to go to the main point. Yeah. So, for effective erosion control, maintain good soil structure, protect soil surface by adequate crop and residue cover, and use special structural erosion or control practices where necessary. After all, you read all these things, kan? What does that mean? That means cover your soil. As easy as that. You want to cover using living plants, can. That's the best lah. But if you cannot plant too many trees because it takes years to grow, which is true because what? Any trees that you plant suitable to stop erosion takes at least 20 years. 20 years is the fastest that you can grow a tree. What tree is that? Acacia. There's no tree can grow faster than acacia as far as I'm concerned. If you're talking about Malaysian trees, they take at least 30 years to mature and to have the ability to stop all those impact of rainfall. Yeah, that's what cover the soil. You can grow trees. Or you can just put as much as possible the mulch. The mulch is like the wood chips, the dead leaves, or the dead ranting, the branches of the trees. So you can chop it up in small pieces, cover the soil, it will do its job. Well, not as good as the trees, but it's still good its job. Or you can just cover the entire surface with tar, root, bitumen. You can cover with root, and then it still do its job. Which one is better? Yeah, after this we're going to discuss. Yeah. Okay, while protecting and improving land investment, control erosion will sustain and improve crop yield, reduce damage, of course. Okay, I think this one is the benefit if you can handle erosion. Of course, that's a reverse of the erosion problem, yeah. You can reduce the maintenance cost, yeah. Um, that's why erosion control is so important, especially in urbanized area, in housing area, because when your house is damaged, it's virtually no way you can repair it. Okay, prevention is better than cure. Because why? When soil is lost, to replenish it, you virtually needs to invest a lot. Now, it's not that you cannot cure the damaged soil. You can, but you have to invest a lot of money. Usually, that's not such a preferred way to solve this erosion problem. Yeah. Okay, most desirable to protect land from erosion and nutrient depletion than to rehabilitate the soil. It is easier and less expensive. See, money is a problem. It's not that you cannot remediate the soil. You can, but cost is the problem. In order to be able to plan and design effective measure, it is necessary to have a good idea of the process of erosion that are most likely to occur. Okay, now, just now you learned about the factors. Kan? There are 5 factors that were going to influence the erosion. Each of these 5 factors influence differently. And because of those 5 factors, when you come to the plan on how to reduce the erosion, it's also quite different. Because let's say, for example, if you have a high slope, then what do? You have to chantas the slope, make it shorter. But if you have agriculture, how often do you see any agriculture on hillside? Virtually non-existent, you know. So those are the things that you have to like treat it differently, because each problem of erosion are caused differently. The causes are quite different. And then to address that problem, you have to understand what is a problem before you can come up with a solution. And here, we are going to dissect what are the techniques that people have used in order to control this erosion. So in general, there are 3 main groups. Well, before that, let's recap. Most of the erosion that happens in Malaysia are due to raindrop. Because what? Malaysia, high rainfall. Okay, now, to solve this problem, you have to see what are the factors. See whether the problem comes from the soil type. If the soil is too soft, too easily like washed away by rain, we have a different way of doing it. However, if you have a topography, then it's a different way of doing things as well. All in all, there are many factors that you need to consider. Either the root cause of the problem and also the cost to solve the problem, socio-economic circumstances. You see, you can choose the most expensive way, but is it worth it? And after this, we're going to talk about it. What are the ways that the cheapest and also the most expensive? But of course, cheap, sometimes they're not so good. Expensive, not always they are very effective. So these are the factors that we're going to discuss. Okay, so there are 3 major groups. Biological measures, that means you're using living things. In this case, of course, you're going to living plants. I never hear people use living animals or humans to have biological measure. Usually it's plants that involve here. Number 2 is about structure. Structure means you have to do a little bit of civil engineering, build structure on the surface, roads, pavements, structure, buildings. These are the examples. Oh yeah, by the way, building highways also, they have a lot of structures on the hill slope, so it's also count under this one. And then finally, management. How do you manage erosion? You can see the erosion coming, then how do you reduce it? Most likely the third one comes under agricultural practice. Yes, how does a farmer reduce erosion? So we begin with the biological measures. Now in this case, I'm going to read through. You see, when we say biological, most of the time we refer to something that comes from the tree to alter this erosion problem. Because after all, I told you just now, organic matter binds the soil. When the organic matter is in the soil, it binds it and reduce the erosion. So I think you know what to do, right? Then add more organic matter. So what do we do? I see. The use of vegetative materials such as straw. Straw is jerami. Straw in bahasa Melayu is jerami. Leaves, I know, is daun, twigs. Twigs is ranting lah, I would say. It should be much, but twigs sometimes also is a small ranting. Yeah. Agronomic practice such as intercropping, strip cropping, and cover cropping. So these are the examples that I'm going to explain to you one by one. What are those types of cropping? So later on. And then finally, leguminous cover crops in a rubber holdings. Why leguminous? Because they increase nitrogen, a nutrient. So more nitrogen, more nutrient, more organic matter coming from the plants. So these are the biological measures. Okay, what about structural measures? So like I said to you, you build things, build drainage, build barriers like waterways, barriers such as the bunds, we call it. Can't show you what right here. Bunds usually I'll show you later on. Yeah. Bunds and also channels. So these are the examples of terrace. So terrace is what we're going to focus on later. Yeah. Now what about management? Management is about how do you solve the problem by managing the soil. Now in this case, it depends on how much fertilizer you're going to put in, how much of mulching that you're going to put in. And these will going to factor in on how well a plants can grow on surface and also how much of organic matter they can sustain in the soil. And also, this is more about agriculture, I have to say. So we're going to go into the details one by one, starting with vegetation. So in this case, most of the erosion happens when you have loss of surface cover. So number one, grow trees. Because trees stop rainfall, absorb moisture, and also reduce the movement of surface runoff. Now, the other things that you can see right here is probably have already explained. Because why? If you still remember just now about the effects of trees, the impact of trees on the erosion and so on, I think I've already explained minutes ago. So having the trees, having vegetation here is akin of having a trees exist. So the long-term solution, if you have time, if you have money, if you can wait, planting trees is the ultimate solution to solve erosion problem. Because if you still remember just now, when we talk about the root cause of erosion, it started with deforestation. So if you want to solve erosion problem, then you reforest it. That means you plant back the forest. Then done. No more erosion. Okay, now, even if you want to plant trees, then you also need to consider a lot of things, right? Because you want to cover the soil as fast as possible, right? Because the moment you don't cover it, you have erosion. Then you have to think, what kind of trees you want to plant. You want to plant the non-native trees that grows very fast. Example, the trees that grows the fastest in Malaysia, however, is non-native. I told you just now, acacia. You know where acacia comes from? It actually comes from Australia. Yeah, you don't know that one, right? And I mean the reason why acacia is here is due to Malaysia in 1990s have a lot of ex-mining site, no trees at all. So the government, the state government have to do something to reduce erosion. So they come up with one solution. They import acacia from Australia, start planting them all over Perak and also Selangor. So that's why you can see a lot of acacia in Selangor and Perak as well, because they grow fast and they're quite durable. But of course, like if you can choose, the best way in order to preserve the diversity of Malaysian native plants is you use the native species. But here's the thing, native species usually take 30 years to mature. So they grow very slow, but they're native. So what to do? You want to protect the soil? Okay, you have to consider whether you want to use a native plants or you want to use a foreign plants like acacia. Because why? Why do we want to keep the native plants? It's not because it's a native per se. The reason why we choose native plants is because acacia, being non-native, is also said to be quite aggressive. Sooner or later, acacia will going to take over the entire Malaysian forest because they are very durable, they grow very fast. So that's why it's always a consideration why you need to always pick native plants. And then the other factors also comes in, the availability of seeds and plants. You have to have enough seeds before you can plant it. And also, is the tree species a risk of fire? Because that happens now. The risk of fire happens to another foreign species who happens to grow really fast as well, but not as popular as acacia. Also comes from Australia. It's called, what is the name? Oh yeah, eucalyptus. Eucalyptus also grows really fast. I think you know eucalyptus is like a peppery smell people use to alleviate asthmatic symptoms. That also comes from Australia, eucalyptus. But eucalyptus has a very big problem. It dries really fast and usually it breaks down really fast. Sometimes fall down on cars, the tree branch. But one of the major problems of eucalyptus is it dries really fast and it comes up in flames really fast as well. Fortunately, like in Malaysia is not a problem because Malaysia is very humid. But if you have a chance to go to Australia, eucalyptus is a big problem. It falls down on people's head and it also starts forest fires. Okay, next one is species with appropriate engineering properties for erosion. Described in the next slide. Okay, so let's look at the next slide. Okay, what are the preferred characteristic or properties that is required for any trees to stop erosion? So the root, of course, just now we talked about the root. It must be very extensive. Extensive so that it grabs the soil and never let go. That's one. If it can go deep, also, no problem. Usually we want it to be extensive, branch out. Okay, number two, the shoot. Dense, uniform close. So you have to like having a branch or the shoot with very broad leaves and they cover every single gap. So why? Because you want a canopy that can stop the impact of raindrop. Okay. And then the growth cycle. Now this growth cycle, if preferred, to be as long as possible. Because why? Some trees, they have very short lifespan. They only grow for maybe 5 years, then after that, they die by itself and replace. So during that, after 5 years, then what do? It dies off. So you have to regrow again. So there's a time gap where there's no protection. So if possible, we want to plant a tree that stays forever. Is there such a thing that a tree stays forever? Yes, there is. Yeah. Some trees, if you can leave it like that, it may grow up to like several hundred years until it dies by old age. Trees can die by old age, but guess what? That old age gap is 500 years or above. Much older than us. Yeah? Okay, growth habit, uniform growth habit close to the ground to protect the soil from raindrop impact. So this is like a pokok renek, small one. And I would say this one will have to combine with the canopy trees that grows really tall. Because why? When you have too close to the ground, it also no good because when it hits a very short tree, somehow some of those impact will still going to travel through and hits the soil. So it has to be combined with a tall tree with a short tree. And then of course growth rate is it must be growing really fast, rapid establishment. Example, the very best example is acacia tree takes 20 years to be mature. So these are the characteristics that you need to have in a tree. Okay, now those are the biological approach. Now I think from here onwards about cropping and residue. So from this point onwards, I believe this is more towards management, very related to management. Okay, now what is crop? Crop means it's plants that you cultivate on the piece of soil, and then you get the benefit of it either from agriculture by picking its fruits or maybe picking its seeds. Now, most of the time, cropping also depends on what you're planting. Some crops actually grows on the root itself, so you have to cut it off. Now, what happens if you have some residue once you cut it off? You throw it in the landfill. The answer to this one is please don't. If you have the residue, these residue are actually the source of organic matter. And most of the time, farmers are encouraged to recycle this residue. Because why? Why we call it recycle and not call it dispose? Because these so-called residue are actually the byproduct of agriculture, and they have nutrient. So any things that have secondary usage, like this crop residue, they can be recycled of their nutrient. So by returning the residue, we are essentially recycling the nutrient. Okay. So crops can help reduce the erosive force of water by means their canopy intercepting. So some crops are big, so they can intercept this one, root system, and then crop residue. By putting back the residue, you can actually recycle the nutrient. I think the best example will be oil palm industry. Now, in the oil palm industry, most of the estate worker, what they do is they have a knife, maybe parang or sickle. They go and maybe trim down the oil palm trees. Now, these leaves, the leaves that they trim down, they usually were going to carry in walkways. I told you some trees they cannot plant too close together, so there must be a gap. these leaves can be pulled to cover those walkways. So it reduces erosion. So that is a perfect example of how a crop residue can be reduced, should be reused to address the erosion problem in agriculture. Okay, now this one, we call it cover cropping. So let's go through the points first before I explain. To be effective, the cover crop must be quickly established, provide early canopy, aggressive enough to suppress weeds, and so on and so forth. Ground cover grow under tree crops to protect the soil from impact of rainwater, particularly important with tall crops such as rubber. Okay, now, the point of what they are trying to say is that some of the crops like rubber or oil palm trees, they might have gaps. So these gaps, earlier I said oil palm trees, you use residue cut. But what about rubber? Now rubber itself, they already have a lot of leaves coming down from the rubber tree itself. But in order to have a more effective ways to protect the soil against erosion, some of the rubber estate farmers, they were going to plant some other secondary plants, secondary crop we call it. So apart from rubber, they may plant other things like cassava. They might even plant groundnuts. Groundnuts, if you still remember just now, groundnuts is also leguminous. When you plant groundnuts, you are doing two things to the soil. Number one, of course, you're going to get groundnuts, more return from the soil. But at the same time, when you plant groundnuts, you're actually pull or fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. In return, after planting these groundnuts, not only you pull the nutrient nitrogen from the air back into the soil for growing more organic matter, but at the same time, these groundnuts also serve as like a pokok renik, short plants that can actually help cover the soil, apart from the tall rubber trees. So you have two layers already, guys, the tall rubber trees and also the shorter groundnuts. So these are what they call the examples of cover cropping. Usually it involves a secondary crop, apart from the primary crop. What about crop rotation? Now this one is quite different. Now, crop rotation means, okay, season one, you plant the first crop. Season two, you plant a different crop. Okay, now, what does that have to do with erosion control? Now, it also helps in maximizing the return, the productivity of the agriculture. Because once you plant the first crop, not every crops uses the same amount or the same type of nutrient. Some crop, they might need more nitrogen. If you change to another crop, this second crop might require another type of nutrient much more than the other. So essentially, if you rotate this crop, you are giving the chance of the soil to recover its nutrient. So what does that have to do? That will essentially maximizing the output of agriculture. But here is a different thing, because essentially crop rotation also may help reduce erosion by having this thing. Okay, extended crop rotation and permanent crop cover effectively protect the soil from the impact of raindrop. Now, how does this happen is that when you rotate the crop, maybe in the first season, you're planting a crop that does not protect the soil against erosion. And then in the next season, you're replacing with another crop with a taller tree. So the second crop, perhaps you can replace it with another crop that can grow much more taller, that can have a bigger canopy. So it actually buys times, give time to the soil to recover by itself. So this is what they call about crop rotation now. Yeah. So crop rotation actually have benefits in controlling the erosion and also maximizing agriculture. Yeah. So usually farmers do rotation. They never plant one single crop for such a long time, unless that crop can last very long time, like rubber and oil palm. Otherwise, they were going to rotate like this way. Now, what about strip cropping? In a minute. I think I have video for this one. If you don't know what is strip cropping is like on the landscape, for example, you have like a churro, you have a slope coming down. Usually along the slope, they're going to plant several stripes of different crop. So maybe on top, they're going to plant with some crops that does not have too big of a cover. But when it comes to the second stripe, the second layer, they're going to plant some crops with very large network of roots. They have a very big root network. Why is that? Because you remember just now the first crop, they don't have so much of erosion protection, so the soil will come down. But by the time it reaches the second strip cropping with very large root network, all the soil carried by the first strip will be stopped by the second strip because they have big roots. They can stop the soil from carrying down. You see the importance here? Because if you have like some mechanism, some crop that can stop the movement of soil, essentially you're cutting down the slope length. Yeah. Because it only managed to travel such a short distance from top to the second strip. And then after that, it does not continue. So essentially you're reducing the erosion by doing that. So these strips they can plant as many strips as possible in order to maximize the effect of the erosion protection. Okay, so multiple cropping. This one is a bit chaotic lah, but I think if you heard one word, this one is very similar to one way of agriculture in which they plant all sorts of things. It's like replanting a forest. That means you're planting next to another plant, a different kind of plants, and then they support each other. There's another word for this one. They call it permaculture. So permaculture is very closely associated to this one. Why this is so? Because by having multiple different plants growing together, they are said to be like having the effect of minimizing the erosion because um, if one plant is not too good in protecting the soil against erosion, the other plant might cover for it. So this is what they call about multiple cropping lah. And intercropping also sounds looks very similar to this one. High density planting usually is not so preferred. Like I said to you, you plant too close together, it reduces the productivity of crops. So this one will work. It also have the effect of minimizing erosion by planting too close. But usually people don't use it because what? It reduces the when you plant too close together, trees don't grow. And then what for again? You plant crops too close together and they end up not growing. You're not getting your money back. So what for again? So this one can be done, but usually it's not done because it kills the productivity of agriculture. Okay, management practice, you have tillage practice. Now, if you still remember earlier, in order to preserve organic matter, you're trying your best to reduce tillage. Now, in this case, tillage is also reduced in order to preserve the soil, to reduce the erosion. Because what? Now, tillage can be done, but it cannot be too extensive. Because what? When you do tillage, the soil will suffer in terms of carbon content. Every time you tile the soil or every time the soil is exposed to the atmosphere, it will suffer carbon loss. So carbon will be lost every time you tile the soil, which is why people don't usually do it. Because if you still remember, carbon is important to actually stick the soil together, then reduce its detachment. So that's why. Nowadays, not much people are going to use any tillage unless it is necessary. Because there's a practice in agriculture called no-till agriculture. There's no tillage agriculture. That is what we prefer now. It doesn't work all the time, but if it works, then by all means do it because it will improve the soil carbon and also reduce emission. Now, another way to increase the soil carbon is you can artificially increase the carbon by mulching. Mulching is taking all these residue crop residue and put it back. It's just like crop residue, mulching. It's the same thing actually. Yeah. So I think because of the same thing, then I think I can skip it. Okay, maybe I can cover straw. I think I talked about it. Stalks mean like rimbunan and a bunch of plants combined together. We call it stalks. Frond is like um frond is like a gugusan. We call it in Bahasa Melayu lah. I remember frond is like gugusan. Like you have a frond of grapes, just like we call it stubble. I don't remember. Maybe you can search the internet later what does stubble is. But all of them they are the byproducts or the crop residue lah. They can be used for mulching. Okay, revegetation, I will skip. That's why already told you. Reforestation is this one. So I think I will skip. Residue management. Again, this one exactly the same with mulching. So I think I will skip this one. Yeah, a lot of these things they use different terminology, but essentially they are the same way. Yeah. So I'll skip this one. Now, moving to the next part. Structural measures. Pay attention, yeah. Structural measures, because this one is the practical one, I would say. Most of the management practice, they work, but the effect is not as great, because when we have erosion, we want fast result, effective results. This can be only achieved if you have money and you build durable structures. You use civil engineers, and that is why usually the effective ways of managing soil erosion, if you already have the problem, is this way: structural measures. And number one is probably the most famous lah. Yeah? Now, every time you travel to highway lah, look at the slope and tell me what you see. You're going to see terrace, cut, bertingkat. Because what? When you have terrace, you are actually cutting the length of the slope. Every terrace that you have, you cut it into small section. Of course, I cannot say that the slope will be greatly reduced. The slope will not be reduced because why? Essentially, there's a small part that you have a very big slope, but guess what? Every time there is a slope cut, you're going to notice that at the bottom of that slope, you're going to see some longkang, some waterways to channel away the runoff. So terracing usually do not work alone. It is usually paired with another structure called waterways. Okay, so this one is not the same waterways that I told you. Now, the waterways that I told earlier, together with the terracing, usually is involving some construction of structures, hard structures that uses cement. Now, these grass waterways is the natural waterways. Now, there are a lot of rivers that you can see. Some of them, they might have grass, some of them don't. Now, by having this grass at the bottom, the bed of the river, it actually helps reduce the transportation of soil particles. So having these grass waterways will reduce erosion simply by reducing the transportation of soil particles. You cannot stop the particles from moving along with the movement of river, but having this grass reduce the movement of soil. Okay, conservation buffer is almost similar to the strip cropping, if you still remember. Now, usually this conservation buffer is where people plant some crops that do not have usage, I would say. Not really say usage. What do I say? Do not give you some agricultural productivity, but having this zone with all these plants, they are functioning as a zone that stops erosion. So this is what we call a conservation buffer. It may not have, it may not give you some agricultural productivity, but they are only there to stop the erosion. So this is what we call a conservation buffer.